There are a lot of decision-making tools available to us, but probably the easiest to conceptualize is a cost-benefit analysis. And this is simply the process of accounting and comparing the cost of a project and the benefits. So cost, benefit, compare. Does it make sense that we're going to actually have more benefits than costs? Okay, let's move forward. Are there more costs than benefits? Okay, let's not do that thing. So in this graph here, we have an example, a hypothetical example of a cost-benefit analysis for reducing air pollution. We have on this x-axis on the bottom, the pollution prevented from low on the left to high on the right. And then on the y-axis, we have dollars per unit of pollution eliminated, with low cost at the bottom to high cost at the top. So as you can see with this blue line, this is the social benefit. We have initial high amounts of social benefit arising from reducing pollution. There comes a point that it begins to dip. And at the same time we have a dip in the social benefit, we also have an increase in the social cost. Okay, so as we continue to remove more and more pollution, we get less bang for our buck. Basically, it becomes more and more expensive. The point at which these two collide is called PO, and that's where the marginal social benefit meets the marginal social cost. So beyond this PO, or the optimum, the costs of pollution removal are greater than the benefits. And that's just in simple terms. As we noted earlier, the benefits can often be intangible or widely dispersed, and so they're often discounted by those who bear the cost. But in any cost-benefit analysis, once you reach that optimum, there's no longer any motivation for you to continue along that path. The costs simply outweigh the benefits. So should cost-benefit analysis take into account natural resources? There are values such as wildlife and non-human ecological systems and services that can be incorporated with natural resource accounting. In theory, this accounting contributes to sustainable resource use because it can put a value on long-term or intangible goods that are necessary but often disregarded in decision-making and cost-benefit analyses. One important part of natural resource accounting is assigning a value, a dollar value, to ecological services. So if we were to take a look at nature services, the total value of nature services on Earth, if we were to put a dollar value to it, is 33.3 trillion per year. And that's about half of the current annual world GDP. Here we have a table from your textbook that is the estimated annual value of ecological services. So here's how the $33.3 trillion value was achieved. Here we have everything from soil formation to nutrient cycling, habitats, pollination, atmospheric gas balance. All of that combined comes to 33.3 trillion US dollars. One of the factors that can make resource exploiting enterprises look good in a cost-benefit analysis is externalizing costs. And externalizing costs is the act of disregarding or discounting resources or goods that contribute to producing something, but for which the producer does not actually pay money. So generally, they belong to society at large, not to the individual user. For example, when a farmer harvests a crop in the fall, the values of seeds, fertilizer, and the sale of crop, they're all tabulated. But what's not tabulated is the value of the soil lost to erosion, the water quality lost to non-point source pollution, and the depletion of fish populations. All of that definitely is a cost, but it was not tabulated or accounted for. So these things that aren't accounted for are most often costs that are shared by the whole society rather than the resource user themselves. They are external to the accounting system, and they're generally ignored in those cost-benefit analyses. So at the end of the year, when the farmer takes a look at whether or not they had a profitable year, oftentimes than not, they'll say yes, even though, for example, there might have been a whole lot of non-point source pollution or soil erosion. There are new approaches to analyze ecological services in those cost benefit analyses. One of them is called the Genuine Progress Index, or the GPI. This was founded by Daly and Cobb. And in this analysis, they take into account real per capita income, quality of life, distributional equity of wealth, natural resource depletion, environmental damage, and the value of unpaid labor. They point out in this GPI report that while per capita GDP in the United States nearly doubled between the year 1970 and 2005, per capita GPI increased only 4%. So while superficially it might look like the United States has just continued to climb in terms of its wealth accumulation and potential prosperity of its citizens, when we take a more nuanced look at the distribution of that wealth and how it impacts our natural resources and ability to move upward in society, we really see that we've not done well at all. There is another metric that we can consider. It is called the Human Development Index, and this helps us track social progress. This includes things like life expectancy, educational attainment, and standard of living. We also have included in this gender issues, which simply have us adjusted or discounted the inequality or achievement between men and women. So we can ask the question, where does the United States rank in terms of this Human Development Index? And so I put a link to this page on the tartan for you. But according to the Human Development Index, the United States is ranked as number 17. The top 10 here include Norway, Ireland, Switzerland, Hong Kong, Iceland, Germany, Sweden, Australia, the Netherlands, and Denmark. And we don't even come close to the top 10. Again, this index takes into account life expectancy, expected years of schooling, mean years of schooling, gross national income per capita, and those gender parity issues. We have trade, development, and jobs all being massive considerations that we must make in our cost benefit analyses. The banking and trading systems that regulate credit, currency exchange, and commodity practices, they were all set up by the rich and powerful nations. And no surprise, they were all set up to better their own self-interest. This is things like the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and the World Trade Organization. All of those agreements were negotiated primarily between large industrial nations. And those nations regulate about 90% of all international trade. So these systems that are in place, they often keep the less developed countries in a perpetual role of resource suppliers to the more developed countries. They can never gain a foothold to become one of those more developed nations. They are the producers of raw materials like mineral ores or agricultural products. And unfortunately, they get very little of the income that's generated from international trade. As a prerequisite for international development loans, the IMF frequently requires debtor nations to adopt harsh structural adjustment plans that slash welfare programs and impose cruel hardships on the poorest citizens in those nations. And an example of this is the World Trade Organization has issued numerous rulings that favor international trade over pollution prevention or protection of endangered species. So what is a way around this, and how can we mitigate the effects of this systemic problem? One of the best ways forward is through micro lending programs. And these finance small scale development projects in these developing nations. These micro lending programs have assisted billions of people. These people, they would really have no other way to borrow money at reasonable interest rates. And this allows people to feel empowered enough to start their own small businesses in their communities, allowing them to start and run a business, eventually repay their loan, and transform their entire life. This is a brilliant connection that can be forged across the world. There are entrepreneurs in developing countries that pair up with lenders in wealthy countries. There's a service that facilitates this connection between those in developing nations that want a microloan and those people who are willing to be the lender in a more wealthy country. There's a service that's offered by Kiva, which is a San Francisco-based technology startup that facilitates these partnerships. And so Kiva partners with about 150 development nonprofits with staff in 60 developing countries. They identify hardworking entrepreneurs in those developing nations that really deserve help. They then post a photo and brief introduction to each one on the Kiva webpage. And then you, as a citizen of a wealthy nation who might have money to give a microloan, you can browse a collection of people who want to start up their own business and find someone whose story touches you. You can give them a loan, which is, the minimum is generally like $25. And your loan is bundled with other people's loan, which helps them make their dream come true. Talking about market solutions that can help us reduce pollution. Many economists believe that market forces alone can reduce pollution more efficiently than harsh rules and regulations that come from Congress. They would approach this through assessing a tax on each ton of carbon emitted. In that way, you would, as a business, as an industry, be encouraged to reduce your greenhouse gases in order to avoid all of those hefty loans. Another approach is called a cap and trade system. This provides upper limits or a cap, which is set by a mandate on greenhouse gas emissions. And that cap would be specific for each country, a industrial sector, or a specific industry. Okay, and so companies that cut pollution by more than they're required to can actually sell their credit to other companies that might have more difficulty meeting those mandated levels. So in this way, this sets up the same kind of incentives as a tax, but doesn't require as much government oversight. Some businesses are taking matters into their own hands and deciding to go green. In this way, business innovators have tried to develop green enterprises that produce environmentally and socially sound products. There are lots of examples of green companies out there, including Patagonia, Aveda, Johnson & Johnson, and they've shown that operating according to the principles of sustainable development and environmental protection, it can be good for public relations, employee morale, and most importantly for them, sales. And here we have some goals for an eco-efficient economy. This is just broadening our definitions of what we mean by progress, what we mean by productivity, and how we celebrate wins, celebrating the abundance of biological and cultural diversity, living on renewable solar income rather than fossil fuels. All of these things really take a shift in our mindset and frame of thinking. But as I just pointed out, a lot of companies are already there. In addition to, a mindset of a company, there are tangible steps that can be made by companies in terms of their green design. Green design, it's good for business and it's even better for the environment. And first, it takes an acknowledgement that heating, cooling, lighting, and operating buildings is one of our biggest uses of energy resources. There are specific architects out there whose mission and purpose it is to create green offices. And one of those green offices that we can go visit is the Gap. Their headquarters in San Francisco is 1/3 more energy efficient than the strict California laws require. And so here's an image of it here. It's estimated that the increased energy and operational efficiency that the Gap headquarters have will have a 4 to 8 year payback for the company. So really, by making these design investments with greenness in mind, it doesn't take too long to make your returns back. Another and important consideration is protecting our jobs while protecting the environment. Green businesses often create far more jobs and stimulate local economies considerably more than environmentally destructive ones. An example of this is wind energy, which provides about 5 times as many jobs per kilowatt hour of electricity than a coal-fired plant does. The world leader in our green jobs is China right now. It's emerged as the world leader in sustainable energy, and they recognize the multi-billion-dollar economic potential of those green businesses. They're investing about $8 billion per year on research and development of green technology. Unfortunately, here in the United States, for years and decades, business leaders and politicians have constantly portrayed environmental protection and jobs as mutually exclusive things. They claim that pollution control and protection of our natural areas will somehow strangle the economy and throw people out of work. There's a lot of data against this claim. In particular, green businesses often create far more jobs. We also can see that most of the layoffs in the US are not the result of environmental rules. So we can see in this graph here the percent of total job losses and then the reason for layoffs. So by and large, seasonal work is the reason for layoffs of a large percentage of layoffs, but you'll notice where environment or safety related layoffs fall. Okay, so although opponents of environmental regulation often claim that protecting the environment costs jobs, studies like this one show that only 0.1% of all large-scale layoffs in the US were the result of environmental laws. So to conclude, more than half of us now live within cities, and in a single generation, about 3/4 of us will live within cities. Shortages of water and housing are urgent problems in fast-growing cities of the developing world. Urban planning continues to try to minimize the strains of urbanization. Transportation, which is key to our economy, is a critical part of city planning. Economic policies are often at the root of the success or failure of cities, and natural resource economics extends neoclassical ideas to internalize the value of ecological services and economic accounting and cost-benefit analysis.